Dragstrip Girl, a teenage tantalizer with a chassis that'll make every man's motor roar.
You gonna come to my party, Don?
I get a little dizzy trying to remember which is my turn and which is Fred's.
Oh, I like you both. Is that a crime?
Here's your girl, Fred. I just borrowed her for a few minutes.
It's an explosive triangle, highlighting Hollywood's new teenage stars. Pretty Faye Spain, pleasing Steve Terrell, enticing Judy Bamber, and dynamic John Ashley. Girls too fast becoming women. Boys who are almost men, teasing death to win the favors of Dragstrip Girl.
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
I brought her back. She'll live and I'll get her another body.
They're gonna kiss me, but don't let anyone see me like that. Please, doctor, help me!
Biologically speaking, it's of primary importance that man should want to mate. Hey, that
You don't get all your kicks from surfing, do you?
We want to be free to ride our machines without being hassled by the man. And we want to get loaded.
You think you're gonna make a slave of the world? I'll see you in hell first!
The American International Podcast.
Are you ready?
Hey, it's another episode of the American International Podcast with me, Jeff Markin.
And me, Cheryl Lightfoot.
And today we are going to be talking about the movie Dragstrip Girl from 1957.
Dragstrip Girl was directed by Edward L. Cahn, written by Lou Rusoff, based on a story by Lou Rusoff, and produced by Alex Golden, and executive produced by Samuel Z. Arkoff.
Dragstrip Girl stars Faye Spain as Louise Blake, John Ashley as Fred Armstrong, Steve Terrell as Jim Donaldson, Frank Gorshin as Tommy Burns,
Tommy Ivo as Rick Camden, Dorothy Bruce as Ann Blake, Don Shelton as Sam Blake, Russ Bender as the police lieutenant, Gracia Narciso as Mama, Tito Vuolo as Papa, and Paul Blaisdell in a cameo.
You remember Paul Blaisdell? He's the one who created all those magnificent creatures for AIP in the early days, from It Conquered the World, Invasion of the Saucer Men, The She Creature.
Oh, he made the carrot from Venus. As fitting for a movie called Dragstrip Girl, the credits start on a spinning tire.
After the credits, we see a couple of jalopies sitting at a light. In one car are Jim and Fred. The other car is being driven by Louise.
Well, we don't know who they are yet. They are teenagers, or at least they're meant to be teenagers. They eye each other for a few seconds before a silent challenge is issued. As light turns green, they take off. Racing down the city streets, they nearly run down pedestrians.
Yeah, they're pretty matched in speed. They do nearly hit one pedestrian who shakes his fist angrily and shouts, "Hey!"
And then the passenger of the car with the guys in it decides he's going to do a stunt.
Yeah, he feels it would be a good idea to stand up and stand between the moving cars.
One leg on each.
And the driver of the other car, Louise, doesn't seem to mind. Now, if I was her, I probably would have slammed my brakes and watched this guy tumble to the ground.
That would be a near fatality.
Anyway, the police get wind of this, and a call goes out to be on the lookout for teens in speeding cars.
A motorcycle cop gets the message over his radio and takes off. When he hears the sirens, the daredevil Fred sits back down in the car. The two cars manage to outrace the cops and pull into a garage.
The guys pull into the garage, and Fred motions for Louise to follow them. Once inside, the guys lock the door behind them, and they go to officially introduce themselves to this young woman.
They're very taken with her. She's a daredevil like they are, and she agrees. She says, "A short and merry life, that's for me." One of the guys says, "Welcome to Hot Rodville." And then they ask for her stats, guessing her measurements. She says, sex opposite, name Louise Blake, 8 days removed from Salt Lake City. And then we also find out she's 18 here.
But the sounds of the sirens are getting their attention, so they're going to slip into their civvies. Louise is wearing coveralls, and they're going to mix in with the crowd.
The crowd is over next door in Mama's restaurant. The cops have arrived at the garage by now, and they're looking to see if they can get into it. They can't, so they go into the restaurant. Once inside, we see there's a police lieutenant and a motorcycle cop. The cops interrogate all the assorted delinquents in the restaurant. They want to know which one of them hot rod charioteers was illegally racing.
None of the kids are taking this interrogation very seriously.
No, they kind of have a I am Spartacus moment where they all seem to admit to being the one.
One of the gang, his name is Tommy Burns, played by Frank Gorshin, holds up his hand and makes a smart-ass remark. The lieutenant slaps down his hand and says, "Shut up, clown," to which Tommy cries out, "Police brutality." Lieutenant says that this is where the craziest of the hot rodders hang out.
But the cops know that one of the racers was female. Tommy, the clown, jokingly tries to pin that on Mama, the matronly Italian diner owner. He goes up to the counter, and when he's trying to pin this on her, she retaliates by clocking him with a pizza paddle, and he falls off his stool. Mama said she would rather ride an electric chair than in a jalopy.
The lieutenant continues with his questioning, but all the kids are playing dumb. Then he gets a little angry.
He says the kids had begged and whined to have a drag strip, and they're still racing on the city streets now that they have it.
And he warns them it's not going to be too long before one of them is facing the judge.
And after that, they storm out.
Ben Smith, kid with glasses, stands up.
He's kind of a nerd, and he asks, which one of you heroes went to take a bow? He doesn't like being in trouble with the law. Ben says that he would like to use the drag strip even if no one else does. And the gang mocks him.
Louise asks Jim and Fred if she can keep her wagon in their garage because it needs some work. And Jim says sure, and he's going to take her over to show her where things are.
It's not very subtle. And Fred decides he's going to tag along to try to move up from third wheel status to maybe first wheel status with Louise. Once they're gone, there's a topic of conversation with the other kids in the diner.
It's Tommy, along with Rick, Rhoda, and Terry, and they're betting amongst themselves which of the two, Fred or Jim, will win Louise's heart.
Rick, he's another nerdy type, thinks that Fred's bankroll is going to win. But Tommy, who's, I wrote down he's a talking chimp, believes that Jim will prevail because he's the strong, virile, romantic type like him. And then he makes a stupid face at Rhoda, who looks at him in disgust, saying, "You smell from formaldehyde."
At this point, someone hits the jukebox and the music starts up, so everybody must get up and dance.
Except for Tommy. He goes to beg Mama for some free food, but she won't give in.
Yeah, he asks for a malted on credit, and Mama says she needs cash first, so Tommy starts in on Papa. Mama asks Papa if he's going to let Tommy buy something on credit. He shakes his head no. She tells him louder so he can hear you. She shakes his head more vigorously.
He's not going to be saying anything for a very long time.
Papa then walks over to the jukebox, places his chef's hat on it, and pulls a pair of earmuffs from his apron pocket and puts them on. Satisfied with the level of noise now, he places his hat back on his head and goes back behind the counter.
He gives him a little Italian salute first, though. In the garage, Jim and Louise are under her car as Fred and Rick rev Fred's car. Jim just wants to ask Louise out, but she's serious about her car.
They start to get a little flirty, so Fred literally comes between them.
Also not very subtle.
He leans down and puts his arm between them so he could talk directly to Louise.
Louise realizes that she's late getting home. She tells Jim to come over at 8:30, and then when Fred protests, she tells him to come over too.
As she drives off, Fred suggests Jim stay home that night.
So it's a waste of time for Jim to come over. Jim says he'll be there. May the best man win. And Fred says, this is one prize you won't get.
So Louise arrives home, tearing into her driveway. Her father, Sam, meets her in the garage. She says she met a lunatic today at a garage.
A bunch of lunatics, I think.
And two of them are coming over tonight.
Her dad tells Louise that she's a real whiz for getting a three-way date tonight. And then he asks her to take off her clothes.
She's still wearing her coveralls. It's a little more innocent than it sounds.
It's still just a bit creepy, though. Dad wonders if it was a good idea to buy Louise these souped-up coils. She might get into trouble. Louise goes in the house where her mom jumps on her immediately.
Louise had missed an appointment at the dress fitter. Louise apologizes and says she got sidetracked. She met a couple of guys at a garage.
Mom's a little suspicious, but Louise says she'll get to meet both of them tonight. Mom wants to know who they are. Louise doesn't know Jim's last name, but she knows that Fred's last name is Armstrong, and his family's loaded.
Anna makes a comment that she should never have let Louise's father buy her that car.
It's dangerous and unfeminine. And then she wonders, what will the neighbors think?
Louise excuses herself, but when she leaves, Anna points out a grease stain on her rump. And it must have leaked through my coveralls, she says.
Now we're on a date. Mom is sitting with Fred on a bench, swooning over some pictures that he's showing her. And Dad is monopolizing Jim over by the car that Jim engineered.
Louise is just standing around with her arms crossed.
Probably the last time she's going to bring her boys home again. Dad says Jim should make a career out of cars.
Jim mentions that it'll help if he wins the regional tests. First prize includes a college scholarship in the purse.
Dad wants to know when that is, and Jim says it's in less than 3 weeks.
Louise interrupts, reminding her father that he hasn't even read his paper yet. It can wait, he says.
And then Mom says to Fred that you must let us see you again. And Fred says, say the word and I'll move in. And Mom looks a little too happy at this idea. Louise is tired of this shared date with her parents and says that it's 10:30.
Anne realizes she's been monopolizing the rich kid, so she lets them go.
She does encourage Louise to get to know him better.
So Fred and Louise hop into Fred's car. Sam and Jim are still talking about the regionals. Sam says, you let me know when those tests are being held. I want to be there.
Louise brought home a guy for each of them.
But Jim notices Fred's car door is being shut, and he says, excuse me, sir, there's one coming up right now. And he jumps in the car with Fred and Louise before they can take off.
At first, Louise is sitting between the two of them, but then she hops into Jim's lap. And from the look on Fred's face, he's not very happy about that.
Next day, we find ourselves back at the garage. Tommy is working on a car. Terry and Rhoda are there, as is Jim, and there is some inane conversation. The gist of it is that Tommy is glad he didn't enter the regional test because what would he do with a college scholarship?
The girls try to get the boys' attention and they fail, so they go back to Mama's to split a glass of water.
As they leave, Louise drives in. She asks Jim how his car is coming along. He says he's about to take it for a test run. Want to come with?
She says, I'm your girl, and Jim says, can I get that in writing? They get a little smoopy here until Tommy asks Jim to get off of his foot.
They get in the car and get a little smoochy. Fred drives up and sees this, and he watches them drive off from the comfort of his own car.
They did not see him at all. Rick comes over to Fred's car. He wants Fred to loan him $100 because he's going to use it to scorch Jim in the competition.
Fred asks what's in it for him. He says that's something that his dad taught him about loaning money. Always ask that question, what's in it for me? Then he tells Rick to get his dirty paws off of him and drives off.
But they're good friends. That's his best friend.
So Jim and Louise are out on the road. Jim asks Louise if he could see her that night, but Louise tells him that her mother asked Fred to drop over.
Well, then her mother can go on a date with him. Jim says it's obvious that Louise's mom doesn't think much of him.
Louise says she thinks all hot rodders are lunatics, including Louise.
But Jim knows that Mom likes sports cars, which is what Fred drives, especially ones owned by the Armstrongs. Louise asks if Jim is jealous, saying that she hopes he is. Jim asks if she likes having two guys after her. Louise says, what girl wouldn't like that?
He gently accuses Louise of playing him and Fred against each other, but Louise isn't going to play that game. Come on, open her up, she says. Let's get this car going.
Yeah, she doesn't want to be serious now. Jim is hesitant, but Louise eggs him on. He says, you sure got a wild streak.
So he speeds up and regrets it almost immediately as he nearly hits a woman with a baby carriage.
Jim pulls over a little bit down the block. He's shaken. Louise tries to minimize his guilt, but Jim is going to be thinking about this for a while. Louise vows to talk him out of those fears.
Jim starts up the car and they putter off. He's going to drive a little more cautiously now.
At least for a while. Now it's the next date night, and Fred is sitting on the couch between Mom and Dad, who are really crowding him. Mom's putting on the full court press. She's asking Fred to come by next Saturday. Fred's free, so he agrees.
Sam looks on, holding his paper. He hasn't read it yet, but it can wait.
Mom tells Dad to pencil Fred in, and we see that Louise is there playing no part in these negotiations. When her dad sees her, he says, you really baited your man trap. He's just so inappropriate.
She comes in and apologizes for making Fred wait. He says it was worth every half hour of it. As they leave, Fred says they'll be back as late as possible. He has a really good rapport with Louise's parents.
Yeah, they laughed at that.
Yep, Sam laughs and no doubt goes off to read his paper. So Fred and Louise are parking. Fred realizes that things aren't going as well as he'd like.
Louise is not in the mood for necking. She wants to go somewhere and do something.
Fred says this would probably be okay if she were with Jim. And he says that Jim's built this wall around her.
Louise says no one's fencing her in.
But Fred goes on. He and Jim have always been in competition, and Fred has never won against him.
It started when they were young, and an apple rolled their way. Fred got to it first, but somehow Jim got the apple. And this is how the chip on his shoulder formed.
Louise tries to get Fred to change the subject, but Fred is a dimwit. No. He goes on and on.
He's using Louise for free therapy here. First it was a spot on the football team, and now they're competing for her. Louise wants him to stop griping. She wants laughs and says this party's dead on its feet.
But Fred ignores this and continues complaining about Jim.
He's got a mission.
Just once, Fred would like to take something away from Jim.
something that he really wants. Louise asks what kind of a threat Jim is to him. Jim has to scrounge for every penny he puts in his car. Jim's dad is a bricklayer. Fred's dad owns half the town. Jim can only go to college if he wins that scholarship prize at the regionals.
This sparks an idea in Fred. If he wins the regionals, that'll show Jim. Thanks, Louise. Great idea.
Yep, he's going to take that scholarship away. And Jim can stay a bum. You can figuratively see a light bulb go on over his head when he comes up with his plan.
Well, Louise came up with a plan. Give credit where credit is due.
He will later. Louise says, "You've really got it in for him, don't you? So much it scares me," says Fred.
Louise has had enough with this profound talk. And Fred agrees, so they're going to go out driving. So back at Mama's Pizza, the music is blaring and everyone's dancing. Ben Smith, boy with glasses, slaps a couple of pizza pans together and says, "Hear ye, entertainment's coming."
Oh, and boy, is it.
Tommy comes out with a mop on his head and a tablecloth draped around him, and then he invents rap.
Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? It's sort of sing-talking, but it does turn into rap. He says, "She's my dragstrip girl with a streamlined chassis, got a set of pipes and a grill that's classy. Dragstrip baby, flip a switch and she'll start to go. Her motor starts a sparking and she can't say no. Dragstrip baby, she's my dragstrip girl with a fuel-injected blast. She may not have a future, but I'll see she gets a pass. Dragstrip baby of mine."
During this performance, Fred takes center stage with a pizza paddle and does a mediocre Elvis impersonation.
Swivels his hips and everything. And then when the two of them finish, they really do sound like the Beastie Boys doing a rap. It's really funny.
So afterwards, Tommy goes to the counter. He slaps 3 cents on the counter and asks for that much in mushroom pizza. Mama tells him for 3 cents, he can smell a slice.
Mama's a little missed because she has to tally up the cost of the props Tommy used in his little stunt. It was her tablecloth, her mop head, etc., etc.
Papa hands her the pizza paddle and she tries to slam Tommy over the head with it, but he ducks.
He's learned his lesson.
Tommy goes back to a table where Rick, Fred, Terry, and Rhoda are sitting.
You know, I was thinking, these kids sit here all day, every day, not spending more than a few cents apiece. And meanwhile, no other customers can come into this diner. No wonder they're angry. I'm surprised they haven't called the cops on them by now.
Well, the cops come in there all the time anyway.
I'm just wondering how Mama stays in business.
Fred says he's become a pauper and that he's transferred all of his assets to Rick. Terry says there's nothing left to live for. And then Fred goes on to explain that he just bought Rick's car.
It's a hot rod. Fred's going to fix it up with a new engine and whatnot. I don't know about cars. But he's doing it so he can win the sweepstakes, tests, regionals, whatever they're called. Terry wonders why Fred needs to win a scholarship when his rich dad could send him to college easily.
Then Rhoda lays it out plain and simple. It's a tournament for the hand of the fair Louise.
Fred promises that once this car is fixed up, it's going to make Jim look like he's standing still.
So over in the garage, Jim and Tommy are working on Jim's car, and Fred and Rick are working on Fred's new car, which is Rick's old car, when Louise drives in.
After she pulls in, she cozies up to Jim. She wonders why he didn't call her last night.
He says he didn't realize it was his turn.
That he's getting dizzy watching her go between him and Fred.
He tells Louise that someday she might have to choose between Jim and Fred. But she says she'll just turn her back on that decision. She's not looking for anything serious. She's just looking for a good time right now.
She's having a party that night and she wants to know if Jim is coming. Jim asks, "Will your mom let me in the front door or do I have to use the back?" This flusters Louise a bit.
Then Tommy comes over to congratulate Louise. She asks what for. Apparently, Fred has let everyone know that his buying Rick's car and entering the race was Louise's idea. Louise asks again if Jim will be coming to the party, and Jim asks again if it's his turn.
Tired of this, she goes over to Fred to ask why Tommy thinks it was her idea to buy the car and win the race. Fred tells her it is your idea.
Don't you remember? We decided to take that scholarship away from Jim.
Louise says, "You decided, I just listened."
But Fred's not listening now. He just goes on and says, "This is one time I'm really going to clobber him."
He's fantasizing about grinding Jim's nose into the dirt. Louise says, "Don't count your trophies before they're won, Mr. Big Wheel."
Fred says he can show her what this car can do after the party tonight, and she says, "You're on."
Over at Louise's, Mom and Dad are setting up a buffet. Did you ever have a buffet at any of your parties?
I never had a party.
I never had a party either. But I went to some parties and it was all bags of chips. Maybe some dip if you were lucky.
So the parents have agreed to stay in their bedroom tonight. Everybody arrives at once.
Tires screeching.
There's dancing. The house is shaking.
Yeah, there's shake, rattle, and rolling. The furniture is bouncing around in Mom and Dad's room.
Sam peeks out from his room and says the energy they're using would generate enough electricity to run this city.
Mom sees that Fred is dancing with Louise.
It's a slow dance.
And Fred is very pleased at this too. He beat Jim to Louise.
But then Jim cuts in. Terry jumps at the chance to dance with Fred. And Tommy sits down on the sofa next to Rhoda. She complains about the floor show, having to watch Fred and Jim compete for Louise. And Tommy says he's going to help Jim out. He turns out the lamp. He turns off another. And he shuts off the light in the other room.
It's really dark in there for a movie set.
Sam's still peeking from his room, and he says, I don't like this business with the lights out. He starts to go out, but Anne holds him back, saying, Sam, you promised. And he says, I have an upset stomach. I need some soda. That makes it an emergency.
As he goes through the living room to the kitchen, he turns the lights back on. But once he's in the kitchen, Tommy stupidly undoes this.
Jim and Louise have stepped outside.
Dad comes back from the kitchen and turns the lights back on, as anyone could have expected he would.
So outside, Jim wants to talk about his future with Louise. He asks her to go for a ride after the party, but she tells him she's already made a date with Fred.
Louise wishes Jim wasn't so serious, but Jim says he makes her take things seriously now, like a career.
Then he asks Louise to go for a ride after the party, but she tells him she's already made a date with Fred. He says, I thought it was my turn. And she said, I thought you weren't coming.
He gets up as if to go back in the party, and she kind of hugs him from behind, begging him to stay. But now we see that Fred is watching them from the porch.
Louise hasn't noticed Fred.
But Jim has.
So Jim grabs Louise and kisses her passionately. Then he says, here's your girl, Fred. I only borrowed her for a few minutes. And he pushes her toward him. He storms off, and Louise pushes past Fred and goes inside. And Jim peels off.
Next, we're at the diner, where our police lieutenant friend is laying it on the line. There's a movement in City Hall, I guess, to take the drag strip away from the teens. If they're using the streets for racing, why even have a drag strip? He's got some safety literature for them, information on how to charter a car club, and he wants them all to have it. He passes out his flyers, but no one is inclined to read them, let alone sign them.
Except for Ben Smith, boy with glasses. He takes some of the reading material.
Nerd.
And then Jim does as well.
He's kind of a nerd too.
Once the lieutenant has left, Fred says that they're taking all the fun out of it. Jim says Fred doesn't have to do it if he doesn't want to. But Jim's going to look into this car club thing. Fred says it must take a certain shade of yellow to only get behind the wheel with the blessing of the cops. Jim stands. Fred says Jim had better check the safety charter, and Jim says he hasn't signed it yet.
Jim gets in his face, and Fred punches him. Everyone starts brawling, then Fred gets knocked out by Jim, and he falls onto the floor.
Mama pleads with Papa to do something, so he puts whipped cream and a cherry on Fred's nose. He admires his handiwork as the kids laugh, and that's when Louise enters.
She pushes through the crowd to help Fred. Fred and Jim are still sparring, even with Louise in the middle. Fred challenges Jim to a chicken run, whatever that is. Jim declines as the sweepstakes are tomorrow. Fred calls Jim a chicken, but Jim still doesn't want to do anything that dumb.
He says the only thing a chicken run proves is stupidity. Rick pipes up that Jim didn't always think that way, and Fred again calls Jim a coward.
Louise offers to be the one driving against Fred, not for Jim, but for herself. Fred asks if Louise is going to wear Jim's stable colors tomorrow. What are they? Yellow and... This finally provokes Jim enough to agree to the race.
So when's it going to be?
It's going to be right now.
So everyone heads off to wherever they're going to have this race.
It's on the open road, wherever it is.
Rhoda is stuck in Tommy's car. It's not starting. Tommy explains that sometimes it needs a little push, and Rhoda knows the drill. She steps out of the car and heads to the back.
The exhaust backfires, and she gets a face full of soot for her trouble. She looks like an angry tiger as she comes around to the door.
As she's getting in the car, Tommy looks over and does the strangest double take I've ever seen. He actually rises out of his seat as he's doing it.
However, once we get to the race location, Rhoda has cleaned herself up. She tries to talk to Tommy, but he tells her to blow.
Louise comes over to wish Jim luck, and he says thanks, and now go give some luck to Fred.
She says she's finding it easy to hate him, but Jim is angry that thanks to her, he has to do this race. He thinks that she cooked this up with Fred. He pushes her away, quite literally, and it's really an ugly scene between the two of them.
She says that she can handle this if he can't, but he sends her away telling her to grow up.
Now the race begins. I found it impossible to tell the rules or the goals of this race.
I thought I understood, but if I understood correctly, Jim lost, but apparently Jim won, so I'm not sure what happened here.
They're racing not side by side, but going in opposite directions on the same track. They eventually approach each other. Jim swerves out of the way, runs off the road, and Fred doesn't. But somehow Jim managed to win that? We watched it about 4 times and we still couldn't figure out why he won.
Since Fred lost, he decided this was just a warm-up and that round 2 was a half-mile run.
Fred's dad told him there's got to be a winner and there's got to be a loser. So he challenges Jim to another race.
For some reason, Rick is going to ride in Fred's car and Louise will keep time.
And Tommy's going to drive Jim's car.
So Fred goes first. Rick is driving and for some reason they decide to switch drivers halfway through.
While they're moving.
So while Rick is switching position, he's thrown from the car. The crowd runs to him and he says he thinks he broke his leg. A few of the guys carry Rick up to the edge of the road, but Fred is only interested in what his time was.
He's badgering Louise for the time he took to complete the course. Louise says, "Can't this wait?" But nope. Louise eventually gets tired of him nagging her and snarls 47 seconds. And Fred is delighted.
He says, "Wow, that's all right. And Rick will be all right." He says he'll get him into the family quack after the show and he'll just bill Fred's father. Everything's all right.
You can kind of see now that Louise truly hates Fred at this point.
Fred tells Jim that he's up, it's his turn, and Jim says he's out, Fred wins. That's good enough for Fred. He's won, and Jim is a gutless wonder.
Fred goes back to Louise, cackling about his win. He's genuinely unable to understand why Louise isn't happy for him.
Yeah, he says, "Well, I won, didn't I? So what are you looking at me like I lost for?"
All that matters is that he won.
Louise just glares at him and then walks away.
Later at Mama's, Tommy and Rhoda are signing Rick's cast. Fred makes a crack about Jim being a chicken.
Jim is having a milkshake with Terry.
Terry tries in vain to flirt with Jim. He's got cars on the brain. Terry knows that he's really thinking about Louise.
And she convinces him to stop and see Louise on the way home and says she's probably waiting there for him. As he leaves, she wishes him good luck on the race tomorrow.
Now Rick and Fred are talking. Rick is coaching Fred through the stages of the test races. The distance run is the deciding factor. Fred wants to know what Jim's car is capable of, but Jim has made a point of not letting him know that.
Rick jokes that maybe Fred can get Jim to loan him his car. At the counter, Mama is watching some of the kids dance, and she says that if her mother saw her dancing with a boy like that, she'd make her marry him. So Tommy motions to Papa and says, "So that's how you got him?" Papa nods his head sadly.
Back with Fred, he feels like his life depends on winning tomorrow. He goes off to call Louise to ask her out, but she tells him that she's got a headache and tells him, no, don't come over. Fred goes back to Rick and invites him out for some drinking. Back at Louise's mom wants to know why Louise isn't giving Fred a chance. This makes Louise a little grumpy, and then her mom apologizes for her aggressive matchmaking. Mom realizes that Louise will be 19 soon, and she's not a little girl anymore. And then Louise and her parents cuddle on the couch for a while.
Smooches are given. Her dad wants to get in on this action, so he leans in for a kiss as well.
And he gets one.
Then Louise decides that since she's a calendar without a date, she's going to go to bed early.
Probably for the best. Back at Mama's, Tommy finally has some money, so he orders a slice of combination pizza. Mama reaches under the counter and pulls out a slice of pizza already on the plate, certainly not warm from the oven, and hands it to him. Tommy realizes he has 10 cents left, so he decides he wants a scoop of chocolate ice cream on top of the pizza.
"This man's afraid of nothing," says Rhoda. And Tommy says that he'll donate his body to science. Mama tells Papa about this order. He first thinks he must have misheard. He removes his earmuffs, and Mama repeats Tommy wants chocolate ice cream on his pizza. But Papa refuses to add ice cream to his pizza. So Mama does it herself, and then Tommy eats it.
Apparently it's fine. He does not die. Now Fred is on the road. He's drinking. He's driving. Rick is with him. Rick is tired. It's after 1 and he needs to get home. He's had a big day. And Fred actually bribes him to stay. Fred says he'll give Rick $50 to stick around, But that's not all he wants.
Fred says he wants to borrow Jim's car just to see what it'll do. Rick says that's car theft, but the $50 has convinced him otherwise.
He needs that money bad enough to play stooge to Fred.
So Fred and Rick go back to the garage. Rick is hobbling around because of his cast, and he bumps into a jack and nicks it.
There's a chunk of plaster not quite fallen off, hanging from the cast. We know this because the movie makes a point of showing it in a close-up.
Fred starts up Jim's car. Rick opens the doors. Rick hops in the car, and the two of them take off.
Later, Fred is speeding like a madman down the highway.
Even Rick comments on his driving.
He's admonishing him to be careful, with good reason. Now a pedestrian changing a tire steps into the road, and Fred mows him down.
Rick says, "You killed him." And Fred says, "Maybe I didn't."
Rick wants Fred to stop, but Fred's afraid of his dad finding out and of going to jail. But Fred is afraid of the consequences of doing the right thing.
Fred knows if they go back, they'll get him for hit and run, car stealing, speeding. And Rick says they're going to catch them anyway because they lost the hubcap. He saw it fly off the car.
Good eye. Fred says they'll go back to the shop and replace the hubcap. And that is what they do.
After Rick calls him a lousy killer.
Rick's going to get over that pretty fast. Rick looks at his cast, and that loose bit of plaster is now gone. But they go home anyways.
Now it's race day. Louise comes to the garage to visit Jim. She says she knows it's a busy day for him, but she wants to talk to him. He says that they could talk tonight, but she wants to talk right now.
She says that she saw herself for who she really was yesterday at the chicken run, and she didn't like it. She apologizes to Jim, and he accepts her apology. They decide that they're going to start over. They even introduce themselves to one another again. And then they have a big smooch.
Jim realizes he's due at the track in an hour and invites Louise to ride with. "Try and stop me," she says.
Now we're at the crime scene where the cops are investigating the crash site. Somehow they know that the hit and run was done by a hot rod, and the car never stopped.
They know they're looking for a car with a dented right front fender, and they're going to take a look around the area to see if any other clues turn up.
Now it's regionals. It's the USAE Regional Sweepstakes, and boy, is it a big deal. There are lots of people on the track, lots of people in the stands.
Cars are being readied for inspection. Part of this entails removing the hubcaps.
The announcer's reading out the day's events. Fred hopes he'll qualify. Rick assures him that he's put enough money into the car, and he will. Rhoda flirts with an uninterested Tommy, who offers to buy her a carbon monoxide soda later.
An announcement comes over the loudspeaker that Fred and Jim's cars have both passed inspection.
They start the time trials. Both Fred and Jim score high, racing for the best time, not against each other. Still, while they're doing that, Fred tries to slam into Jim while they're driving.
At the end of this, there are 4 total qualifying cars, and Fred and Jim are among the 4. Surprise, surprise.
And there's other 2 people who don't matter, qualifying as well.
Fred tells Jim he should just give up and go home, but Jim says that he's been doing all right so far. Fred says this is the part where guts are needed.
Jim doesn't take that bait. The next race is some kind of automotive slalom. They drive around hay bales and S-curves. And then there's a break for lunch.
Rhoda complains that Tommy never takes her anywhere, and he tells her to ask for a raise in her allowance.
Back with the police, one of the cops doing the search finds a hubcap. He takes it to the lieutenant, who determines that if they find the car it goes to, they'll have their man. Back at the track, Louise is in Jim's car, tidying up, I guess. She finds a huge chunk of plaster in the back seat. Not knowing what to do with it, she just throws it on the ground.
Fred is talking with Rick about his chances on this final round. He and Jim are pretty much tied. Then Rick notices that the police are coming this way, and he panics just a little bit.
Fred's like, "Be cool, man, I'll do the talking." Not a direct quote. The cops go to Jim first, and they ask where his hubcaps are.
Jim explains that they remove them for inspection and store them in the strip across the way.
The cop notices that Jim has a dented radiator.
And Jim says it must have happened in one of the runs.
Now the lieutenant goes over to Fred. He shows him the hubcap and asks if he knows of any car that has hubcaps like that.
And Fred says Jim does, and Rick concurs. So the lieutenant goes back to Jim and asks to speak with him.
Jim agrees that that cap does look like the ones on his car, but Tommy says that he took 4 off the car before the inspection. The cop wants to go across the strip and find the hubcaps in storage. Jim says, "Can't that wait? The race is about to start."
The lieutenant says that nobody waited for that man who was killed last night. So Jim hangs his head and follows.
Yeah, you can't argue with that.
Fred watches as Jim follows the lieutenant and smiling says, I just won the race.
After Jim and the cops leave, Louise sees that bit of plaster on the ground. She looks at Rick, who's standing close enough. She sees that his cast has a chunk missing from it. Rick instantly looks guilty at this.
Louise immediately gets into Jim's car and puts on a helmet.
Fred is also driving. Rick runs, cast notwithstanding, over to Fred's car. He flags him down to tell him that Louise found the bit of cast in the car. Fred is all, so what? Rick fills in the gaps. It ties them to the car that was involved in the hit and run.
Fred asks if she had shown it to anyone. Rick says no. And Fred says, I'll have to make sure she doesn't.
John Ashley's accent does not sound like he's from California, which is where this is set.
He's from Missouri.
He's from Missouri. And so the race begins. Rhoda runs over to Jim to tell him that Louise is driving his car in the race. The cops try to bring Jim in, but he begs to stay till the end of the race.
Lieutenant says it probably wouldn't make any difference if he sees the race because he's going to be needing to take his car in anyway.
The race announcer gets a note and reads it to the crowd. The note says that Louise is driving the car instead of Jim. But that's okay because it's the car that gets the points, not the driver.
So Fred and Louise are neck and neck on this track, and Fred tries repeatedly to run her off the road.
Soon the other two cars drop out of the race, and now it's just Fred versus Louise.
An announcement comes over the loudspeaker that the police have called off the race and that all drivers are to exit the track.
Louise gets away from Fred, who's pushing at her, and pulls over. But Fred keeps going because he's determined to win this race. It's the only thing that matters to him.
The announcer keeps calling for Fred's vehicle to pull off, but Fred really wants to win.
While this is happening, Louise takes that bit of cast she found and runs over to the cops to show it to them.
Fred crosses the finish line and then crashes through a gate. He gets out of the car and starts to run, but Jim catches him and punches him, and the police are there to take care of the rest. Fred tries to pull the old, do you know who I am? The cop responds, oh, one of those.
That's so funny.
And they wound up Rick as well. He can't run very fast or far with his broken leg.
And now we're at the epilogue.
So back at Mama's Pizza, the kids who aren't in jail are having a swell time.
Jim and Louise are cuddling at Mama's as Rhoda watches jealously. Louise wants Jim to write her from college. Rhoda turns to Tommy and lists all his faults, but then kisses him anyways. Mama looks at all the young lovers and says that Jim found a good woman. Then she turns to Papa and asks if he too found a good woman. He won't answer, so she starts to cry. Papa's still not answering, so then she threatens to go live with her sister in Baltimore. Papa is unmoved, so she starts crying some more, wailing even. She asks, how would you feel if I went to Baltimore? And this prompts Papa to speak for the first time. He says, I'll pack you some sandwiches for the trip. Mama cries, and Papa goes out to the dance floor and starts boogieing with Rhonda.
And that's the end. You're listening to the American International Podcast, where we're talking about Dragstrip Girl from 1957.
The script for Dragstrip Girl was written by Lou Rusoff. He was the head of story for American International Pictures. As for the cast, Steve Terrell, who played Jim, had been in Runaway Daughters for Golden State. That's one of AIP's production companies. And Golden State signed him to a 15-film contract at 3 films a year for 5 years, with the option for a 4th year. That's a lot of movies, but you have to remember that AIP would take about a week to make a film.
John Ashley, who played Fred in Dragstrip Girl, had not meant to audition for this film. He accompanied his girlfriend to her audition and was asked if he wanted to try out as well. His audition was successful. Hers was not.
John Ashley said that he improvised a little Elvis, and that might have helped him get the part.
And he subsequently signed a long-term contract with AIP.
Dragstrip Girl was also Judy Bamber's feature film debut. Although a Hollywood Reporter production chart indicated that the film's interiors were to be shot at American National Studios, a modern source states that that lot never existed, and that the film utilized a stage at Kling Studios.
Filming for Dragstrip Girl started on January 14, 1957. The film was shot in 6 days. Part of it was captured at a real-life race, and the movie's budget was either $65,000 or $100,000. 2 different accounts from John Ashley on making this film have given different numbers for the budget.
Knowing AIP, I would say it's the smaller amount. This movie's taglines were, car crazy, speed crazy, boy crazy.
She's a dream at the dance, a darling to romance, but a devil on wheels.
The movie was released on April 24th, 1957, as a double feature with Rock All Night, and it proved an early success for the studio. Samuel Z. Arkoff of AIP said that when the film was released in the Los Angeles area, 40% of the theaters showing it were drive-ins.
The monthly film bulletin called Dragstrip Girl a depressing and irresponsible film, glorifying the defiance of law and order, lax morals, and the discardance of civilized behavior.
Los Angeles Times reported that the youngsters in the film, youngsters in quote, are very poor representatives of today's youth, probably because they're all at least 25.
A more recent review from Diabolique magazine said Ashley was a terrific delinquent full of scowls and swagger. He'd never had an acting lesson, but he has a natural presence and easily steals the movie from the good guy, Steve Terrell. Though, in fairness, Ashley has the better part.
In 1994, Showtime produced a series of remakes of AIP films, and that included Dragstrip Girl. The 1994 version, directed by Mary Lambert and starring Natasha Gregson Wagner and Mark Dacascos, dealt with juvenile delinquents and hot rod racing, but it was otherwise completely dissimilar to the 1957 film.
Bill Welsh, who was the announcer at the racetrack, was a known reporter for KTLA in Los Angeles. He had played a similar role in several movies, most notably in The Day the Earth Stood Still. Not the Keanu Reeves one, but the original, and a bunch of other films. But I did find something interesting about him on IMDb. In April 1949, while working as a news reporter for KTLA, he covered the story of 3-year-old Kathy Fiskus's fall down a well in the Los Angeles suburb of San Marino, California, and the subsequent unsuccessful rescue attempt. This broadcast, shared with legendary reporter Stan Chambers, lasted nearly 40 straight hours and was considered the first live television event. It became a national story and became a template for how live news events should be covered. It also compelled the purchase of thousands of television sets in the Los Angeles area.
Wow, that's really sad. Luckily, the baby Jessica story had a better outcome. Keep your wells covered, people. Although best known on screen as the second banana to Frankie Avalon in AIP's beach movies of the 1960s, John Ashley found even more success behind the camera. He produced such cult classics as The Big Dollhouse and Savage Sister and Black Mama, White Mama. And then he went into television in the 80s. He struck it big as the producer of The A-Team during its 1983 to 1987 run.
The cast of Dragstrip Girl included a lot of contract players with AIP, so several of these actors would appear in other AIP projects. Steve Terrell, who played Jim, had previously appeared in Runaway Daughters, as we said, and he would go on to appear in Invasion of the Saucermen and play nearly the same character in Motorcycle Gang in 1957.
John Ashley, Fred, also appeared in Motorcycle Gang, Suicide Battalion, How to Make a Monster, and Hot Rod Gang in 1958. Then he took a well-deserved break, I think, because he's not in another AIP movie till Beach Party in 1963. But he also did Muscle Beach Party and Bikini Beach in 64, Beach Blanket Bingo and How to Stuff a Wild Bikini, and Sergeant Deadhead in 1965. He was in the Larry Buchanan-directed remake of Invasion of the Saucermen, Attack of the Eye Creatures in 1967 for American International Television, and he was in Savage Sisters in 1974.
Frank Gorshin, who played Tommy Burns, had previously appeared in Hot Rod Girl and Runaway Daughters in 1956, and would go on to appear in Invasion of the Saucermen in 1957, Tank Battalion in 1958, and of course, played the Chameleon in Record City in 1978, and finally was in the Filmways film Underground Aces in 1981, which is the last movie that Samuel Z. Arkoff had involvement with prior to his leaving Filmways.
Tommy Ivo, who was Rick, only appeared in Ghost of Dragstrip Hollow in 1959. Russ Bender, our police lieutenant, was in so many movies. It Conquer the World in 1956, Invasion of the Saucermen, The Amazing Colossal Man, and Motorcycle Gang in 1957, Suicide Battalion, War of the Colossal Beasts, and Hot Rod Gang in 1958, Ghost of Dragstrip Hollow in 59, Panic in Year Zero in 1962, Space Probe Taurus, 1965, Devil's Angels in 1967, had an uncredited appearance in Wild in the Streets in 1968, and that year he was also in Mary Jane and The Young Animals.
Judy Bamber, who played Rhoda, would go on to appear as the statuesque Alice in A Bucket of Blood.
Don Shelton, who was Louise's creepy dad, Sam, appeared in Invasion of the Saucermen in 1957 and High School Hellcats in 1958.
And Leon Tyler as Ben Smith, Kid with Glasses. Had previously appeared in Shake, Rattle, and Rock in 1956 and would go on to appear in Submarine Seahawk in 1958.
Was he the kid in glasses in those movies too?
We'll find out. So, Cheryl, it's time for us to give our thoughts on Dragstrip Girl. So using our AIP scale where A is awesome, I is intermediate, and P is pathetic, how do you rate Dragstrip Girl?
Dragstrip Girl is classic AIP. They may have repeated this plot over and over, especially in the 50s, but it's a really fun genre, and I can see why teenagers of the day were drawn to these films, where their dramas were taken seriously, their parents were understanding. It's like catnip to teenagers. And one day, I may grow tired of the teenage delinquents race fast cars genre, but today is not that day. I thought Faye Spain and Steve Terrell were terrific as teens just barely on this side of the law, and John Ashley is perfectly loathsome as the narcissistic rich kid who wants everything that he can't have. As rich as he is, he can't easily get the things that Jim works so hard to earn, and he's almost chilling as he decides he wants to utterly ruin Jim over an apple. I think there's great character development in this too. Louise changes her fun-time girl ways, and she really does grow a little after she sees the result of hers and Fred's bad choices. The side characters in this are fun. They may be a little overdone, but I really like Judy Bamber as Rhoda, though I think she could easily do better than the oafish Tommy, Frank Gorshin. Still, though he came close to overkill with his character, I think he was reined in just enough to keep us from dreading his appearance. Rick, Ben, and Terry weren't as fun, but they got even less screen time than Papa and Mama, the adorable Italian stereotypes. Mama won me over right away when she clobbered Tommy with that pizza peel, and Papa's first line, the last line of the movie, was cute. I thought even Louise's parents, while a little overbearing and laissez-faire with her, I mean, they may not have approved of all her choices, but at least they weren't stereotypes like I'd expect of parents who have some money and a social reputation to uphold. As for the special effects, yeah, the driving footage shot against the rear projector film looks really bad. But you can't ding the movie for using the best technology that 1957 and the AIP budget had to offer. I do think the racing was the least interesting part of the movie. And oddly, for a movie titled Dragstrip Girl, there's not a single scene of a girl on a drag strip. But that's the AIP way. They'd think of a title and they love it, and then they craft a movie around it. But still here, Louise, and this is kind of a problem for me, she's kind of secondary. It's almost more dragstrip boys, because it's their deadly rivalry that forms most of the tension in the film. And the romantic entanglement is more of a subplot. A better movie would have given Faye Spain a little more to do than just be sort of the plot device. I think she could have led the film rather than just being the wedge that drives Jim and Fred apart. But these are minor nits to pick. For an AIP film, I think it's one of the better ones. I haven't seen all the movies in the teens racing cars genre, but I like this one. I liked it enough to give it an A. What do you think, Jeff?
Dragstrip Girl is really, as you said, a typical AIP movie. It follows the formula to a T. And I think this is helped by having all the contract players on this film because it's all these familiar faces. The plot itself is simple, and the ending is no surprise. As soon as Rick bumps into the jack with his cast, we know exactly how this movie is going to end. The only wild card being, will Louise come to her senses and go with the good guy?
I think that was a foregone conclusion, too.
I don't think it was. Maybe because it's a movie, but it didn't seem really true to life that she grew up and made that decision.
Well, they only had 70 minutes.
I think some of the cast were interesting choices. John Ashley obviously is not from California, given his accent. So his parents moved to town and then bought half of it. I don't know. And the character of Terry, we didn't mention, but she has a very stereotypical Southern accent. So I guess this takes place in Southern California. The character of Tommy is fun in small doses. I think I'm glad I don't know him personally. One of the things that I think is really fun about this movie is the script itself, the way it's written. It's slang like 100% of the time. Everything coming out of these kids' mouth is the words of the day or what an adult writer might think are the words of the day. And I wonder how it actually played to audiences if they would have recognized all these words talking about jazz. And there's a lot of car jargon. And we didn't elaborate on it, but the scene where Louise is talking with her mother when we're introduced to Anne, and Louise is just spouting off all these car words, and Anne's just like, yeah, whatever. And I don't know, maybe that gave the teen audience a little sense of superiority if they understood this when the adults didn't. But I would agree, this is just a really fun movie. It doesn't drag. And at about 70 minutes, it's just a fun ride the whole way through. As I said, we know exactly how it's going to end, but the fun is in the journey. And I'm going to give this one an A as well.
We agree once more.
So I think we've come to the finish line on Dragstrip Girl. Until next time, I'm Jeff Markin.
And I'm Cheryl Lightfoot.
And we'll meet you at the drive-in. Follow the American International Podcast on Instagram and Letterboxd at AIP_pod and on Facebook at facebook.com/American International Podcast.
The American International Podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Markin.
A man whose mind is distorted by hatred.
And Cheryl Lightfoot.
A girl hungry for too many things.
The American International Podcast is part of the Pop Culture Entertainment Network.